I really appreciate chatting with you today. I think that we stirred a bit of a debate a couple of days ago um, with regards to budget, and I think there's a lot out there in the sales world with regards to best practice everything. I think that's causing a lot of confusion. I don't think it helps many people, at least on LinkedIn, right? If you judge that little circle. But I thought that, given that we had different opinions, I put up out a post the other day basically saying, if somebody said, if you're reaching a budget objection, there's no point trying to sell value. What you need to do is like nurture the relationship and try later. And you disagreed, right? And I think I was actually, to be honest, let me take it one back. I was inspired by your post, which basically said, budget is a terrible excuse. You've got to sell value, right? Let me know if I'm paraphrasing this wrong. And I was like, what? So I think, look, this is like a great debate, great discussion, so all sorts of comments on both sides. So would love your take. So let's think of how we start. Let's start with the objection, maybe. Why do you think like the objection comes up?
Yeah, I think what has to be put into context is when we hear that objection, let's call it, because I think it can definitely have different contexts, whether you hear that on a first initial cold call to when you get it maybe slightly further down the sales cycle. I think what we tend to see most frequently, I believe, is where we get it really early on in the sales process.
Yeah.
Got an SDR calls up a prospect. They have a brief conversation, or maybe not much of a conversation at all, and the prospect says, "So we just don't have any budget for things like this right now." And I can see. I think it's important. The point I was trying to make is the difference between budget and spare cash. Budget is in a business sense, in a B2B selling environment, which I think we all, the majority of people who will be watching this are living, is a financial plan. It's a plan for us. What do we want to spend our money on over the next 12 months, and how can we, proportionately allocate those funds to different departments. And most of the time that budget's already been allocated because of renewals on existing tools and things. So when people say, "So I haven't got budget for this right now," I think it's important to distinguish what that actually means. No budget is in you don't have a plan to spend any money with me, but you didn't even know who I was 30 seconds ago, or the bank balance is running dry. We're just cutting costs now. We just haven't got any money to spend. Very different context, very different meaning. But when people hear, "Sorry, I haven't got budget for this right now," more times than not, I actually think means what the prospect is saying is, really, we didn't have a plan to spend any money with you. We've actually got plenty of cash, but we just didn't have any plan to spend any money with you. And by the way, I don't even want to listen to what you've got to say. And the salesperson says the reason they didn't take the meeting is they've got no budget. I think that's not necessarily the reason why they didn't take the meeting.
Yeah, and I think that you've touched on two key points. I think one is the timing of when that objection comes up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a huge difference between when it's coming up in the first conversation, be it with the SDR or even, by the way, with the AE. It could be that somebody maybe wasn't qualified, or maybe they just were interested, and then they get on the phone with the AE, and the first thing they say is, "Listen, if this is above X amount, I can't buy anything." I think that's one part. And I think that the other part that you were sharing is it's maybe a little bit also related to the mindset of who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very hard to sell to somebody who is in a mindset with a scarcity mindset, as you'd call it, right? So there are companies that, companies go through different cycles, and individuals sometimes are like that. So if you're talking to somebody and all they're thinking of like, how can I save some money or whatever, then it's going to be a problem. I think no matter what you sell, and that's a real hard barrier to break. But I think that let's talk about the timing of it, because I think that, most people probably who are going to listen to this, maybe it's just us who are going to listen to this.
Probably is.
It probably is. I'll give it to send a link to my mum. So most people who listen to this have probably faced all those objections, right? So if you're an SDR, You get on the phone, hey, this is what we're doing. We help in blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's shut down straight away. I think that one is an obvious objection, and I'm sure millions of people get that. I think first like AE to prospect conversations, another one where they lead with a price question, like, hey, Richard, before we even start this conversation, I need to know what this costs. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then I think the third is down the line, you've sold the value, you've brought in the partners, and you're getting a budget rejection. Hey, yes, the champion turns to you, Richard, so sorry. Like we already thought this was going to go, but apparently we just don't have any budget. It comes from, the upper levels that you can't get access to because, I can't allow you access to them. So maybe let's break down the three. Like, let's go, you're an SDR today. Okay. We get on the phone. And the first thing I say to you is, yeah, it sounds interesting, but to be honest, we're not spending any money in this area right now for this year. I would hold that the one option, maybe not the best option, is to basically say, okay, when works to reconnect. That's like, let's say maybe plan B. Plan A, it's going to be hard to sell them value, right? It's also probably going to be hard to do it, convince them in those 10-second window that they're probably giving you their attention for. So I would argue plan A is something kind of similar, but involves basically saying to the person, hey, let me just clarify what we do, just to make sure. This is what we do. This is why I reached out to you. This is how I thought it would be helpful. I understand if we could solve for that problem in the future, would you be at least open to a discussion at this point? Now, if they're throwing out that budget objection early, they're probably literally just saying, I just don't want to talk to you. So if that's the case, they'll say, no, and then you try to aim for a certain date or whatever that you could try. I think those would be two ideas that I'd probably throw out there. I don't know what your thoughts are. How would you handle that on the SDR level?
I guess I'd be almost coming back to getting some context as to what they really mean when they say that. When they say that, so it sounds really interesting. Which, let's be honest, when they say that, they've listened to maybe 30 seconds or a minute's worth of dialogue. So the extent of what they know is very, very minimal. When they say, sorry, we just don't have any money to spend on this right now, or we don't have budget for this right now, come back to the main topic of discussion, budget. If I was in that position, I'd almost want to quantify what they really mean when they say we don't have budget. Could be questions like, when you say that you haven't got money to spend this right now, is that because cash is tight? Is it because budget's already been allocated to spend on different tools? Is it because you already have something in place that you think what I'm telling you sounds like it's a similar product? Or is that you just still don't really understand the value of what I'm selling? It could mean any number of different things, and I just think that it's like a kind of a rapid reaction that prospects make of objections that just roll off the tongue. It's one of the first things that come to their head. It's it's haven't got budget for this right now. Could mean equally this. It could be they could be using that but to the next person they'd be saying, "Oh, I'm not interested," or "Sorry, I'm really slammed at the minute." So I think the key thing before we actually go into figuring out, okay, is this a prospect that we want to stay in touch with? Is this a prospect that we want to try and help them see the value more? Is this a prospect that there's no point in even staying in touch with them whatsoever? I think the only way that we're going to truly answer for an SDR, answer that question is by actually quantifying what they mean when they've said, we don't have money to spend this right now. What does that actually mean? Until we have the answer to that, we're still in guess mode, and probably maybe even investing time chasing up nurturing prospects who are never going to buy from us. And that's just that's just not a good strategy.
I think that's a hugely valuable point as well. I think that people run from objections. And what you're touching on is actually to run to the objection, right? So if the objection is budget, then you're basically saying, great, tell me more about that, right? And you're using it as information that you can leverage off, right? It's a bit like a counterpunch.
Yeah.
And I think that's critical. I think that if you're an SDR, especially if you're new, you're so used to oh, he said no, and just put down the phone. Okay, I'll come back another year or whatever,
Yeah.
I think I had somebody said to me something like, try me in 5 years. He said to me, no, this was the objection. He said,
On March the
try
1st.
me once a year, every year. I just said, okay, I'll see you next year. I was like, well, I just knew this guy's going nowhere. So I think that that's like a pretty critical one. First demo, so the handover from SDRs to AEs. There's nothing like that moment when you get off a call as an AE and you say to the SDR, like, why did you send them my way?
Why was I on there in the first place?
Yeah, like why? Like what is what? And oh no, they were just really keen to hear more and they were excited about it. So if you're on a sales call, the guy starts straight up with, Richard, listen. I think what you're doing at Refract is really interesting, but I need to know price like now because I need to know if this is even something I can afford.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are tons of people that would say, tell it, tell him, yeah, we'll get your price later. There's also a huge camp of people that'll say quote straight away. Where do you stand? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, interesting one, this, David. I'm a big advocate of, if you've got someone who just needs to know the price, then the more that you resist giving them the price, the more that you're going to build resistance. And ultimately, sales success comes from lowering resistance. The lower resistance, we have more open conversations, prospects trust us more, yada, yada, yada. So if someone says, listen, I just need to know the price, and we're swerving that and saying, listen, can't really talk about price right now until we've established value, blah, blah, blah. All we're going to be doing there is making prospects feel like they're just going to get frustrated with us. They're probably not going to be as open. So I think in that situation, if someone really wants to know the price there and then, go with them with a ballpark. And I always like the phrase, for a team of your size, this could start from your lowest point, because the lowest point is your most likely chance of not scaring them off, but you're still telling them that it starts from there. It could go up, but at least gives the prospect a flavor of a ballpark. If at that stage someone says, listen, that's just way out of our price range, then I think at that point it comes back to really starting to quantify again. When you say it's out of your price range, what do you mean by that? Is that a price range that you are able to sign off? Is it a price range because you just don't have enough cash in the bank to spend that much money? Is it, or is it because we haven't spent enough time talking about value? And if the reality is, if at that stage the prospect is saying, we would never ever spend anything like that on a product like this, to me that says this person's probably not going to spend the time trying to learn how we can help. In other words, there's probably no point in even continuing the discussion. My time is best spent elsewhere. But yeah, I think coming back to your initial point, I think if we're asked about price, if prospects want to hear a price, let's just give them something. Otherwise, you run the risk of being in a long sales cycle with somebody who is never going to buy your product in the first place.
Yeah, in fact, you might not even start the sales cycle. Like in your head, you've written, okay, demo 1 done. And in their head, they're like, I'm never talking to this guy again. He doesn't give me. I think that's like something that, for whatever reason, and for a long, long time, just sales just did not think from the buyer's perspective. I think today there's much more of that. And I always say, like, think like a buyer. Like if you're ever trying to buy anything and you just want to know the price, you're trying to understand, is this even something, even if I do see the value, is this even something like possibility or not, so
totally.
And I agree, like I personally I get irritated when I'm on a call, but maybe also because we're sales, like sales trade, whatever. But
here's an example. Anybody that says, if let's imagine you're out and you want to buy a new jacket and you're shopping for a jacket, any salesperson listening to this conversation is lying if they said in the first 10 seconds or 20 seconds of them, they're in the market for a jacket, they're in a shop, they see a jacket on the shelf that they really like. In the first 20 seconds of them getting close to that jacket, what do? They look for the price tag.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Because you want to figure out, do I have, is this jacket in my ballpark? Do I have the cash available to spend on this jacket? And I think if more salespeople thought of that, of like, well, how does this relate to my life? It would help them understand more about, when they're selling and what their buyers want to.
Yeah, and I think that analogy also touches on something else, because if you're the little kid, like I've got little kids, right? They want things. They don't know how much they cost, right? So he doesn't care. He's like, I want that toy. And I'm looking straight at the price. So I think also it depends who you got on the phone in some respects. If you've got someone, it's like a yes and a no, and it's iffy. Like if you've got someone who actually knows the budget, in some respects that could be like, yeah, I need to tell him the price straight away, and it's like obvious, and he's like zooming in on it. Also, if you've got someone super super junior, they're basically going to get shut down no matter what the price is that you tell them, right? And I think that that's part of the challenge, but comes down to a qualification thing. The other one though is, when you sell enterprise or really high value, contracts, you're hardly ever quoting on the first. You might give a range, as you mentioned, and that's like, and then but it depends on factor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Sure.
So I think that that's also something that if you're in that first demo conversation, that you do have to try to navigate around. And one of the things that I've always done really successfully when selling to enterprise is to basically, you give a range if you can, or you basically sit with the person and say, listen, if you'll trust me for now, I guarantee you, like, we've never found a budget that we couldn't work around or fit into. Roughly you're looking at from whatever point onwards. Like, how does that sound? How about I show you a bit more about what we do? You tell me if this is something valuable and interesting first, if you can actually see the work value, and then leave it to me to make this work. And I think that, like, something you touched on, which is probably the most critical part about sales, is pretty much removing those barriers. There's no trickery. It's actually, it's the biggest misnomer about sales. People think that, like, a great salesperson just tricks people into buying stuff. Like, we were joking yesterday, at work, somebody asked me, like, why, what the word Rex means. And we were just like talking, like, what's what? And I said, it means king. And someone was like Googling it, right? And they're like, oh, you better check it out. Like, the sales guy, told us. Like, yeah, you better check your facts. And there is like this feeling like, oh, with sales, there's no kind of transparency. But actually, the best salespeople are extremely transparent. And to be honest, the best salespeople don't even sell. They literally just say, like, all right, here's what it is. Here's why I think it's interesting. We have an open conversation. I take in what you tell me. I use that in the conversation to kind of display to you, let you make the choice. Like, here's what you're telling me is the problem. Here's the solution. Can you see it fixing? Yes, I can. Great. Let's knock down all the walls together to get this set up for you.
Yep.
And I don't know why. Maybe it's like a way back when legacy thing, that people think that there's like these ways to convince people and these tactics to kind of pressure them in. But I think that causes like huge issues. And it also stops people from answering calls and taking, prospecting discussions, even if it does look interesting or relevant.
Yeah. I totally agree, David. I think this phrase I hear in sales is like, oh, he's on our closing team, or he's a great closer. I just think it's nonsense. And because all that relates to closing sounds like it just sounds like it's all for the salesperson. It's like, oh, you're closing the person, or here's you're using your tactical close. Yeah. And the reality is like, to be a great closer, you have to be a great opener, and you have to have those conversations. Your product pitch and your close isn't even relevant until you've actually found out if there's a good fit or not, if you can actually solve problems. And the only way you're going to find out that is asking great questions. When we ask great questions, we build great value. And I just, thinking, just going back to something you said before about, your kids, and they always want stuff, and it's not always stuff that you want to pay money for or afford. Great example of this is where of this cost v value and even budget comes into mind. So my CEO was telling me just before Christmas that one of his sons wanted as his big present a pair of AirPods, right? The new, the latest brand. And his wife was saying, we don't need to buy AirPods. Let's just get the £40 ones that look like AirPods. We've got two other sons to buy for. The budget's going to be really stretched if we're going to spend, whatever, £200 on a pair of the latest AirPods. And my CEO said, we could buy him the £40 AirPods, that £40 that look like AirPods, but how's that going to make him feel? If he opens the present and they're not the AirPods, and he takes them to school, and his friends ask him what he got for Christmas, and he says, "I got these, sort of AirPods." And it was an emotional. Ultimately, the value or the impact of doing that suddenly became a lot bigger. So what happened? He went and found the budget to spend on the real AirPods that made his son over the moon, jumping around, happy as Larry on Christmas Day, dead excited to show all his friends. And I think that was a great kind of example of where the first reaction could be, we don't have budget for that. But yet when it actually gets talked through about the impact of that, and what does it mean what would it mean on Christmas Day if he opens the present with a face of disappointment? And what does that mean for us? And ultimately, they went and got the budget just because the value when it was actually talked through and the questions were asked actually became a lot bigger. And I think that's a great example of where someone can immediately say, "Oh, we haven't got the budget for that," to actually people go and find the money if they actually process the values big enough.
For sure. And I think that's, that touches on one of the most, I think maybe the final key point here is we sell to people, right? We're not selling to maybe one day, by the way, and maybe coming very soon will be some sort of procurement bot that's literally just like putting your data points and like, okay, you are the best
Sounds
solution.
like hell.
Terrible, right? For everyone. But right now, like there are so many enterprise high-level conversations I've been part of where people have literally just said, the main reason we bought this, and this is not an ego thing, but the main reason we bought this is because we liked you, we trusted you, or we liked your team, and the vibe that you guys gave us in the sale gave us like a huge amount of trust. And 100%, I think you do. It is an emotional thing. Everything is emotional ultimately, and so is purchasing, even if it's on an institutional level. So I think that's like a really important point. I think we've covered some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. Hopefully there's lots of stuff there for people to, listen to, give feedback on. I think these are good topics to discuss. It's stuff that we all face every day. People might not agree with stuff I've talked about. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, hopefully there's some good content there for people to absorb and give some thought to, and maybe even want to try out. So
awesome. And Richard, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. It's the best way to contact if you want to, follow more of the stuff that we post about. If I feel like, David, we've got this could become almost like a regular fixture. Who knows?
I think so too.
Depends what the appetite is. We can find out by asking the LinkedIn world. But
absolutely.
But yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn if you want to find out more about me, my company Refract do, and thanks for inviting me on and talking about this.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric, for that fun.